SoCal Connected is made possible through the generous support of the Unspent Foundation, serving the Los Angeles community since 1952, and by a grant from Ann Ray Foundation, a Margaret A. Cargill philanthropy.
Tonight on SoCal Connected.
It's sickening. It's a clear example of how rules get manipulated.
A little-known plan to protect the public's access to beaches is failing, and developers are winning.
It took 10 years to get this accessway open to the public.
If you have money, you can bulldoze your way through whatever you want at the expense of every other Californian.
And why are millions of dollars meant for a camp for foster kids sitting unspent?
Where'd the fees go to? They go to some drawer someplace into some deep dark hole and we never see them. The controller of the state of California ought to do an investigation and find out what's happened to those fees and why they haven't been spent.
I love this beach. I've been coming here since 1976, so I feel totally at home here.
Abraham Powell came here for what was supposed to be a celebration for his son's 6th grade graduation.
So we grabbed our swimsuits, came down to the beach. We got here, and 3 guys in blue suits came out of the Miramar. And they're kind of nice suits, and they had little poofs, you know, the pocket poof in them. You know, we thought they were coming out to take our order. Immediately as they started talking to some of the women that were standing closest to them on the beach, and it was clear that they weren't taking their order. You know, they had these kind of stone looks on their face and looks of disbelief, and they started looking uncomfortable. And I realized something was going on, so I just said, I'm gonna just start videoing this. And as I got closer, I heard that they were pointing at the beach and talking about how it was actually private property, and that we kind of needed us to leave, and we were, you know, we were just stunned. We just want to know where you think the mean high tide line is.
No, we were just saying that people walking on the property, kids running across the lawn, etc.
They just told us that it's a private beach and that we'd have to leave. And when we started talking about it not being a private beach, it just got a little fiery, and it kind of took off from there.
It didn't go well. Let's just put it that way. The kids started chanting.
It's not a private beach! It's not a private beach!
One thing that was clear is we weren't leaving.
It was confusing, it was sad. Most of all, we were disappointed that you know, here we felt like we were sharing our beach, our local beach, with them, and yet they were telling us that we had to leave.
The Rosewood Miramar Beach is owned by the billionaire shopping center developer, Rick Caruso. Rooms often go for more than $1,000 a night on weekends. But no matter how much guests pay, under California law, they are still required to share the beach with the public. But when Powell visited, the hotel wasn't in the sharing mood.
Early the next day, where we got word of what had happened, of them kicking the families off the beach, it went viral, at least locally, and then it turns out kind of statewide, and it got a lot of people's attention, because when the Miramar first opened and they were like ramping up their sort of outreach, you know, there was a lot of eyes on them of how they were going to interact with the community, how welcoming they were going to be to average beachgoers and residents nearby. In some ways, people were looking for an excuse to be proven right that this ultra-exclusive, ultra-luxury resort was going to start messing with the regular people of Santa Barbara and Montecito. And unfortunately, they were proved right.
Powell's video caught the attention of the California Coastal Commission. That's the agency in charge of making sure the state's 1,100 miles of coastline stay open to the public. The commission sent a strongly worded letter to the Miramar, accusing the hotel of privatizing a beach with security guards and rope lines. If the guards and ropes didn't go, the hotel would be fined $11,000 a day. The ropes came down and the guards retreated.
Yeah, that was kind of remarkable. That happened so quickly, like remarkably quickly.
Quick action is unusual for the commission. It's not uncommon for violators to go decades before they're caught, if they're caught at all.
All of my caseload is dealing with permits from the 70s or 80s. So yeah, it's just a slog. We're next to the Malibu Pier and next to the Malibu Beach Inn, in between them. The Coastal Commission a couple years ago issued an order to the Malibu Beach Inn because in the 80s, when this property was redeveloped, they took away a public access. And so to mitigate for that, the commission required that 2 staircases be actually built over this revetment to help people get down to the beach. And it just was never done. And unfortunately, back then, we didn't have the resources. So no one knew about it until our staff went through it and realized, oh no.
Back when the Malibu Beach Inn was permitted, the commission had a much bigger staff than it does today.
Coastal Commission has been chronically underfunded. It's really bad, and they don't have the staff. When they have an enforcement officer, for example, who needs to look at people who've done things to close off the beach or built things that they shouldn't have built, they got one for like 500 miles.
Since the late 90s, the number of active cases has skyrocketed from a couple hundred to more than 2,000 today. And there are only 8 enforcement officers keeping track of the entire state. One of them is Andrew Willis. We spent a day riding along with him.
It's always a struggle for us with our one enforcement staff that's covering all of Malibu, but also all Ventura County and Santa Barbara County at the same time.
Willis started his career as a lawyer. Then he took a big pay cut and joined the commission 15 years ago.
The first site we're going to look at is a row of houses in Malibu along Pacific Coast Highway. They're immediately adjacent to a public walkway that goes down to a beach. You would never even know that the beach is there. This is a great little secret beach, but we want to get the word out about this being open to the public.
These women practically have the beach to themselves. Why? Because some residents have tried to make it impossible to find parking.
All the signs the private property owners put up are illegal signs. And so you wouldn't know that if you're just a typical beachgoer. You're trying not to break any rules, trying not to get a parking ticket.
The fake no parking signs have been known to not only fool beachgoers, but even local police who issue real tickets.
These don't look very official. This is just one more instance of a sign popping up. We can hardly stay on top of them. I can see more down that way now that we're standing out here. There's hundreds of homes along here. They could show up overnight at no parking sign. We wouldn't necessarily notice. One person going up and down this coast trying to stay on top of all these things.
A UCLA survey of California residents found a lack of affordable parking was the #1 reason why most people don't go to the beach.
When we came here, we did like 8 U-turns trying to find parking, and then ultimately settled and came into one of the parking lots, and it's kind of ridiculous. You come and it's $15 to park your car just to go to like the beach.
Up the road, Willis shows us another case.
This is one which was quite an ordeal. The property owner can put millions of dollars into, I might be overstating it, but a lot of money into litigation, and they fought us on this access way for over 10 years. It took 10 years to get this access way open to the public. Every day, every year that went by, the public wasn't able to get to this public beach, this public park.
Once Willis gets to the beach, there's what looks to be another violation. A homeowner has set up cones to keep people away. Willis takes a picture. He'll add it to his stack of cases to investigate. A little later, he finds another homeowner trying to scare away the public. Time for another picture. Making sure people can get to the beach is only one mandate of the commission. Another is making sure they have an affordable place to stay overnight once they're there. There's a provision in the California Coastal Act almost no one has heard of. It says the Coastal Commission must protect and encourage low-cost lodging.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that the state, because it doesn't really seem that way to me.
I did not know that. I feel like it's becoming more expensive, so I didn't know there was a law that's in place to avoid that.
I wouldn't even know where to look around here for a place to stay. I wouldn't even consider it. It's got to be, I don't know, $300 a night, $500 a night.
Almost 25,000 low-cost rooms along the coast have been lost in the last 3 decades. Practically every new hotel built has been high-end.
I consider low-cost overnight accommodations to be an endangered species. And if we don't work hard, we're going to lose it entirely.
We have been way too lax about how we enforce our low-cost accommodations.
When developers replace budget rooms with upscale ones, Commission guidelines say they're supposed to pay mitigation fees to fund affordable rooms somewhere nearby, like the Santa Monica Hostel. Since the Coastal Act went into effect in the late 70s, hundreds of new hotels have been built. But the Commission has only collected $32 million from just 23 projects.
The fees are too low. They don't collect enough.
Cities are often the ones that are supposed to collect the fees when they approve a new project. But the Commission could only cite 3 times in the last 4 decades when that's happened. And after calling dozens of cities and counties up and down the coast, we could only find 1 time a city required a developer to pay the fee. That was Santa Monica. Local governments we contacted don't see the in lieu fee as a legal requirement, but rather more of a suggestion.
A lot of this happens at the local level. So, if you have something going through at the local level, a lot of times the local governments are much more malleable. They're not playing the watchdog role. They're not advocating for these things. It all gets very tied up in what's going to bring in bed tax, all those things. And I think you saw by the example down in Malibu, which used to be Casa Malibu, like the only affordable accommodation in Malibu at the time.
Then in 2007, billionaire Larry Ellison bought the Casa Malibu and transformed it into the Nobu Ryokan. Rooms are so expensive, they've been written up in the New York Times.
Oh, it's $2,300, so it's much worse than I even anticipated.
Despite becoming one of the priciest hotels in California, the project never went before the Coastal Commission. That's because Malibu approved the development not as a new hotel, but as a remodel.
I didn't feel it was a remodel, but I found out about it too late. And because they approved it, no one appealed it, it just went through, and that is lost forever.
In the end, Ellison did contribute what the city calls a voluntary in lieu fee to Malibu. That amount, just $33,000, or about what the hotel grosses in one night. It's the only in lieu money that the city has ever gotten. And Malibu told us that 6 years after collecting the fee for Nobu Ryokan, the money just sits there, untouched. And that's a common theme, whether at the local or state level. Even when the commission does collect fees, they often sit in bank accounts, unused for decades.
Where'd the fees go to? They go to some drawer someplace into some deep dark hole, and we never see them.
Since the 70s, more than 2/3, some $22 million, has never been spent.
It's something that probably the controller of the state of California ought to do an investigation and find out what's happened to those fees and why they haven't been spent.
The unspent fees include $500,000 designated for a hostel in Santa Monica, nearly $1 million for campsites in Big Sur, $6 million for a hostel near the port of San Diego, and nearly $4 million for more cottages at Crystal Cove in Newport Beach.
What happens here is that you collect the money, you try and do the right thing, it sits there, nobody's monitoring it, people don't know to apply for it, there's all kinds of restrictions on getting the money.
The Commission has used fees to justify construction that might not otherwise get approved.
Hello, my name is Rodrigo Iglesias with Hilton and Highland, and welcome to Grand at Malibu Colony.
This prime stretch of land overlooking the Pacific and Malibu was originally zoned to be visitor serving. But developers had other ideas. They wanted to turn it into an exclusive, ultra-luxe gated community.
You have also the mountains and vast territories to put tennis courts and anything you would accommodate in a phenomenal estate. So we call this one St. Barth.
You had one of the last remaining pristine, bluff-top open spaces that could have been used for much better purposes.
Good morning. Welcome to the California Coastal Commission for August 12th.
In 2015, commissioners heard the case. At first, they were reluctant to turn over the land.
If we give up this bluff, if we give it up from the public's use, and it's gone, it won't ever come back.
But they had a change of heart after the developer agreed to set aside $4 million to help build a campground for foster kids up the road.
The fact that it would benefit kids in the foster care system in LA County is just, I think, the frosting on the cake.
I see it as a win for the children and families of California.
4 years later, there's no camp for foster kids, and the $4 million is still sitting in an account somewhere. It's been stymied by Malibu residents who strongly oppose the project.
It's too many people here already. I personally wouldn't like it because it would bring more people and more mess.
We want to keep Malibu, not turn it into a tourist destination.
Lo and behold, isn't it ironic that the $4 million that we received from that project for this youth camp is also being fought by, guess who, the city, because they're worried about the constituents that don't want those type of people camping in their backyard.
The residents of Malibu don't seem to be bothered by more mansions. Each new one built, and there's 5 of them, will go for as much as $100 million apiece.
That should never have been allowed to be built on. It was supposed to be public property and there was environmentally sensitive habitat there.
It's sickening. It's a clear example of how we get manipulated, how rules get manipulated, and how if you have money, you can bulldoze your way through whatever you want at the expense of every other Californian.
The Commission also has to contend with developers who willfully ignore permits and figure that with such a small enforcement staff, they will never be caught.
This used to be the site of 2 low-cost motor lodges that were accessible for most Californians. They received a permit to demolish those low-cost motels, but never received any permits to build this boutique luxury hotel that is there today. And we see this time and again from some developers that want to not ask for permission but beg for forgiveness.
The Commission didn't even realize the Shore Hotel's permits were being ignored until it got a tip years later.
We're going to consider a proposed consent, cease and desist order and consent administrative civil penalty with Sunshine Enterprises LP et al. Regarding the Shore Hotel.
After years of litigation, the hotel agreed to pay a $15.5 million fine, by far the biggest amount in the agency's history. The hotel's lawyers spoke before the Commission.
It is a considerable penalty on an enterprise that is operated by a family, not a chain of hotels or a large hotel developer.
Most commissioners thought the penalty was too small.
It's a drop in the bucket. So, I mean, I'm not sure that this is a way to tell other developers that, you know, you can pay your way out of these penalties.
This was not oversight. This was willful. And that deliberate decisions that were made caused some damage to the state of California.
If we could, I would like to not even talk about fines and issue a decree that says they have to knock the damn thing down. Those are my 2 cents.
No. There you go.
No one from the shore would talk to us about this story. In the end, the commission unanimously approved the fine. But why didn't they shut down the hotel, or at least force it to charge the affordable rates it had originally promised?
I wish we had as much power as you assume we had. As a commissioner, I was one of 12. We are not all-powerful and can direct our agency to do whatever it wants to do.
The Shore Hotel is no isolated incident. In Orange County, there are only about 600 low-cost hotel rooms left on the coast. In LA, just about 550.
Everybody deserves to be able to come to this coast, and they shouldn't have to drive, 4 hours to get here to not be able to afford to stay there. We have kids that live, not far inland who have never been to the coast. It's a constitutional right as far as I'm concerned, and it's protected in the California Constitution that people should be able to get here.
Affordable hotels aren't the only thing disappearing from the California coast. The coast itself is shrinking every year. The celebrity enclave of Broad Beach in Malibu used to be known as a place where the public was not welcome. Homeowners even hired security guards to keep people off the beach. That no longer happens, but now there's not much beach left for the public to enjoy.
The irony here is the name Broad Beach was from a time and a period a century ago, before sea levels began to rise. But I think today we might rechristen this beach the incredibly shrinking beach.
Patzert has made it his life's work to warn people about the dangers of climate change.
When the oceans heat, they expand. Even more than that, the great ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland, they're experiencing accelerated melting.
In the last 100 years, the sea rose less than 9 inches in California. By the end of this century, scientists expect the ocean to rise by 9 feet. 42,000 homes will be underwater, as will the Venice Boardwalk, and crucial infrastructure like the Hyperion sewage treatment plant. In Southern California, 2/3 of beaches could vanish. Patrick says Broad Beach is a preview of what is coming to the whole state and the dilemma we face. Do we protect homes or the beach?
Now there are 2 ways to fight the incursion of the sea, what I call the battle for the beaches. One is to build these heavily reinforced seawalls. Another way is to truck in these large concrete or natural rock barriers. But the end result is always the same. With rising sea levels, if you reinforce the coast, you lose the beach.
Broad Beach homeowners are chipping in tens of millions of dollars over the next decade to bring in mountains of sand in an effort to restore a mile of beach to what it looked like in the 1970s. It's an expensive and very temporary solution that only benefits a few.
Now there are 40 or 50 millionaires along this beach, but there are millions of people in Southern California that love to come to these beaches, to surf, to picnic. And in California, the beaches are public. They belong to everybody.
Oceanfront real estate on Broad Beach and on the rest of the California coast has never been more valuable. And as the beach vanishes, construction continues, more every year, building new mansions, resorts, and hotels for the state's wealthiest visitors and residents. On our last stop with Enforcement Supervisor Andrew Willis, he was eager to show us a victory for the Coastal Commission, an example where fees from violations have benefited the public. It took 2 decades of legal wrangling before this stairway to a small beach was finally opened in 2016.
We were able to build this staircase, which without this staircase, the public could not get down to this beach.
But after all those delays, by the time the stairway opened, the beach had nearly washed away. California coast shrinks more and more with every passing year. There are fewer beaches for the public to go to. For the average beachgoer, it's a dual threat: wealthy developers and a much more formidable foe: nature.
SoCal Connected is made possible through the generous support of the Amundsen Foundation, serving the Los Angeles community since 1952, and by a grant from Anne Ray Foundation, a Margaret A. Cargill philanthropy.